Okay, hello everybody. It is I, Keith Burgun. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to be talking about some game design stuff. Uh, yeah. Let me really quick catch people up on like what's been going on. So we are doing well. So I've been thinking for a while about Gem Wizards tactics and how smoothly it was playing. Let me, I can just actually play the game real quick, or can I? Oh, I was just working on something. My bad. Whatever. I'll just fix this later. Um, okay. So, yeah. I'm just going to play a little bit and talk a little bit really quickly about what I sort of see as, or I've seen as a potential problem. Okay, so you have right now, what am I looking at? Like, I mean, this is the first turn, so it's kind of like a setup turn. That's sort of how that always goes. Um, which we want. I think that's a good thing, especially because they're randomly placed. Like, I much prefer a setup turn to a like phase where you place the units. I think it's a lot more natural. But anyways, there's so many things that you can do right here. Like, even just if we take these two units, these are two very simple units, right? So we have the archer and we have the Royal Guard. We actually, we could move the Royal Guard to here and then have the archer shoot them and bump them into there. And they actually wouldn't even take damage because they have this large shield which blocks the damage. So that would be good. You could move the archer, but you could also bump the archer first before moving them. You could also bump the archer, like you could move someone 2 tiles, bump the archer to get them in position, have them bump that person. So there's just so much interdependence between units and their moves. Now, this is kind of like some of this is like by design, like we want there to be that kind of thing. But and some of this so anyway, the problem is that overall it creates this feeling of like there's just too many buttons I can press. Like for example, Gale, I mean this is a smaller Gale, but like it's one of those abilities that changes the position of everybody. And so I could cast that. And so there's so many of these kinds of things, and it just really adds up, and it kind of makes it sometimes feel a little bit much. Now, I've been thinking of some solutions that are quite radical, and I've definitely decided not to go with one of the radical solutions. I actually think that this can be sort of fixed on partially a componential basis, like, changing how an individual ability works. And also partially it could be fixed by, I'm thinking, we'll talk about some potential solutions. And yeah, so, but that's the basic issue, is just, it's not so much like it's partially a calculation issue, but it's also partially just too many things. Let me catch up on chat here. Herbivore, aka GLP, says one of the things I'm planning to talk about today is what Justin Alexander calls a default action. The setup turn is the one place where GWT has a strong default action. All right, well, so yeah, I'm gonna have Herbivore, aka GLP, onto the show to talk about some of this stuff, and yeah, let's call him in and I'll let him take the floor. But the before I do, I'll just say, like, I'm putting this aside, but it's a really interesting thought. Like, how many things should you be able to do on a given turn? And if you want to reduce that, what are reasonable ways to do that? And it's kind of an issue of calculation, but it's also kind of an issue of smoothness. Which is a bit different than that. And I'm not sure it's been a very well defined, but it's more of just an expression for now. All right, so I'm going to start the voice call with GLP, aka Herbivore. Hello.
Hello, hello. Let me mute the Twitch so that I don't have latency in the way. Hello. It's great to be on the show.
Yeah, it's good to have you. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing your thoughts.
Yeah. Um. So yeah, I'm GLP on Discord and Herbivore here on Twitch, and in real life I'm Gabe Pofter. Um. And I guess we can just jump right in. First, I should note that we're today we're talking about I guess what you call the action funnel, what I call the search tree,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of like tools for managing the size of it. But I there's a separate business demon conversation to have about like whether it makes sense to do any of them in Gem Wizard's Tactics. But
Sure.
in just the realm of theory, you were asking me about this a few days ago, and I was thinking about it a little, and I sort of thinking about how other games handle it. Stuff like Into the Breach, which I sort of think of as one of the games that's closest to Gem Wizard's Tactics mechanically, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of it has a lot of bumping, um, and stuff like XCOM, which I've played a lot of, and some other tactics games that I've played. Games like Xorder, like the Shadowrun games, like Third Edition Dungeons and Dragons, and I sort of noticed a pattern
Mm-hmm.
that there's different ways they implement it, but ultimately all of those games boil down to each unit has two things you can do in a
Mm-hmm.
turn.
Right.
Unit can
Two
move.
things total?
Two things total.
Okay.
Each unit can move,
Mm-hmm.
and each unit can take one action that affects other units.
Okay.
And a lot of the time, like D&D is a rare exception where you can do that in any order.
Mm-hmm.
In most most tactics games, in Into the Breach and XCOM, in the standard is that your action that affects other units ends your turn.
Yeah.
And so you have to move first
Yeah.
if you want to move. And then of course there are exceptions to there's a unit in Into the Breach that gets a move after it attacks. There's a similar ability in XCOM. There's sort of there are rare exceptions to those rules,
Sure.
but it's surprisingly consistent. Even in something like Westnoth, where you have like XCOM has the really chunky movement ranges, where it's like you got your blue move and your yellow move, and that's it. And
Yeah.
something like Westnoth has a much greater dynamic range in terms of how far you can move, but even there, you move
Mm-hmm.
and then you attack and then you're done.
Yeah.
And so the effect of that seems to be that it really narrows the range of possible things you can do
For sure.
in a way that limits what you have to consider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I mean, yeah, that's kind of what I've been getting at a little bit is that like looking at and thinking about other tactics games. Now, I have maybe more of a complaint with other tactics games probably than I think you do. Where for me, like they're too simple. Like they're too. I feel like I can't do enough, particularly in a game like Advance Wars or the first XCOM 2012. I feel like I wish I could do more on a turn a little bit, or have some more room for playing creatively. Like that's very important to me. So that was like the driving force behind the design of this game was I really want players to be able to play creatively. And I think that's been achieved, but I also think I sort of just feel like I went like, one or two steps a little bit too far. And it could be pared back a little bit. And like as you're talking, the thing that I'm leaning towards as like a more conservative change is using an ability ends your turn, and then design, and then making a couple of, maybe there's a couple of, you know, exceptions like here or there or things like that, as you said. But for the most part, you got to move and then use an ability, and you can't. Also, I like the idea that you can't use an ability and attack. That also feels like another one of those like chunky
Right.
order of operations things.
And the mention of attacking just sort of reminds me, because I hadn't even been thinking about Gem Wizard's Tactics attack action in this conversation yet, because it's not very effective.
Yeah.
Whereas in something like XCOM, which probably is the tactics game I've played the most, maybe like this isn't the case with a pod leader, but with sort of your typical enemy, 2 of your standard shots, if you put your people in the right place, can take them down.
Uh-huh.
Whereas in Gem Wizard's Tactics, it's like 5, 6 melee attacks.
Well, it depends on the unit.
My guess.
For sure. I mean, that'd be for one of these like tanky Royal Guards or something. But for a typical unit, I think you can kill them in 2 to 3, depending on which they are. But also, the annoying thing, though, is that actually attacks can be effective in this game as long as it's like you do your ability, you have this other guy do his ability, then you attack. Like you finish them off with an attack. Like that's more how you have to use it, I feel like. Does that make sense?
Yeah. One thought I just had is it's been a while since I was playing Gem Wizard's Tactics. The abilities don't have cooldowns, right?
Correct.
And so that's a big difference, where something like XCOM, the special abilities usually have multi-turn cooldowns.
Yeah.
And so the times when you're considering using them
yeah,
are rare.
You know what's funny too
and that-
is the reason we did originally have cooldowns. I don't know if you were around during that era, but originally we had cooldowns. The first version of this game, all the units had cooldowns, and the problem was the enemy units then, which were at that time mirrors of your own units before the whole gem mob or whatever. That was a real problem for enemies units to have cooldowns, because you're like having to keep track of enemy unit cooldowns. Like that was a nightmare. So that's why we got rid of cooldowns for the player units. But yeah, like for example, Shield Bash, if that had like a 2-turn cooldown, then it wouldn't really be like, I probably wouldn't maybe use it on turn 1, you know, or I certainly wouldn't be thinking to use it like every single turn, which right now you are for sure.
Right. It's at least my experience playing games with cooldowns, I try to use them as early and as frequently as possible.
Yeah.
What it does is it gets this more variable structure in terms of there are like on a short cooldown, maybe every 2 turns you have to consider this option in the tree that you're searching. And then on the other turns, you don't have to consider it. And
right.
So it gives some variability where some turns are more work and some turns are less work. And then, of course, you have different units with different cooldowns of different durations, and those are layering together. But you have some amount of variation there, and the effect is that most turns, many of those abilities will be in cooldown, and so each turn you're looking at a smaller number of future possibilities that you have to search through, while still allowing on the turns when those abilities are available to do the cool things with those abilities.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. Yeah, that's a really good point. Actually, I'm gonna write that down. So a couple of things that we've discussed are cooldowns, which now I feel more comfortable bringing those back because it's no longer mirrored with the enemy. And I actually already have all the code in there for them, which is kind of funny.
I do maybe want to talk about the keeping track of cooldowns question.
Sure.
Just because, like, And when I play XCOM, um, there are enemy ability cooldowns that I'm keeping track of. Uh, and to some extent, I think they expose some of that information in UI, and then some of it's just like look at the wiki, learn that the sectoid can raise a zombie every 3 turns or whatever it is, and then track that. And that's, I guess that's a bit advanced.
It's also
And
it's also
not
maybe more
everyone
of a
does that.
right. It's more of a problem in theory maybe than in practice. Do you think?
Right, but I also think there's one thing that XCOM does that I know you've complained about on the Discord, and I still don't totally understand what your problem with pods is, but it like that's a tool that XCOM uses to great effect to narrow by it really reduces the number of enemy units in play at a given time, and what that does is they're like tracking enemy cooldowns. There's fewer of them you might have to track, and it also means in the sort of if then tree search where you're saying like if I do this, and then like if I take this shot and the enemy doesn't die, then it will do this. There's fewer of those branches to search through,
Right.
and I guess it does. It's sort of between each pod, there's not a whole lot of meaning or game state carried over, and so that's maybe one problem with it. But it is a very effective tool at reducing the amount of calculation that's necessary.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, yeah, like so I understand why pods are there. Like I get it for sure. They're just they're my problem with them is that they're very canned and kind of like artificial and actually too simple. And also, yeah, like as Ryan says in the chat, the problem with pods, you have to stutter step your units forward. And basically, the game, at least in the first game, it becomes like, don't discover a pod on your last guy's turn, the game. You know what I mean? Um,
Right.
yeah, so like it was just kind of artificial, but it does do like what you're saying for sure. Like it does work in that sense. And I think there's something that could be, something of that for sure can be learned for a game like this, I think.
And so I wonder if maybe that core of the system isn't probably isn't something you want to copy, but maybe around a different core, some of its supporting mechanisms could be useful. Like the way I'm not sure how it works in the 2012 for XCOM, but in XCOM 2, I know there's a significant amount of AI code that cheats with the pod patrols. So, like, if you're currently engaged, pods that that otherwise would have patrolled towards you will instead move along the edge of the fog of war, just outside of it, so that they don't engage unless you push towards them.
Okay.
And so there's techniques like that maybe could be decoupled from the pod system and still be useful for limiting the number of units the number of enemy units that the player has to be aware of at a given time, and sort of considering what they might do and how to deal with them.
Yeah, I mean, I also yeah, the whole question of the dealing with cooldowns and things, like I think that'll actually be a lot easier now with the Omni Mob, because we can basically make it that every enemy unit has at most one ability, which already is the case actually of these guys. Like for example, here's the Omni Mob Ice Mage. He only has Ice Storm. So now what that means is we can put a little cooldown like number or like icon on them or something to be like, hey, this guy can use his ability next turn, something like that, if we wanted them to even have cooldowns. So I think that's good. I hadn't really considered bringing cooldowns back, but I think that's a good way to go. for sure.
I don't have a fully formed thought here, but I wonder if there's something worth investigating in the way that XCOM's gameplay, for example, is really heavily focused on alpha striking enemy units, taking them out before they can act, and the way that that reduces the size of the search tree. My guess is that it does so to an extent that you wouldn't like, because there's not room for creativity at that point.
And there's not enough space for the AI to do stuff itself. You know what I mean? Like for it to kind of influence the game via add input randomness to the game. Basically like there has to be space for the AI to influence things. So if they just show up and you just kill them instantly. But with that said, I will say, like, I don't know if since you've played, right now I'm playing a rank 15 game, which is very high rank. But when you play at most ranks, there's a lot more lower hit point enemies. There's a lot of enemies that have 5 hit points. There's a lot of enemies that have 1 hit point. So there is more of that now than there used to be, for sure.
Yeah, that's new since when I played even the lowest difficult. I don't think I played any ranked matches, actually. I pretty much played the campaign. But like certainly the campaign difficulty, even the lowest one was I almost want to say oppressive in terms of like, I think there's something going on with your targeted 50% win rate for everyone, where like, I don't know, my hot take, I guess, is the lowest difficulties should have a high win rate, because there's a group of people who want to win, not to learn.
Well, let me
make sense.
Yeah. So effectively, I agree with you, because basically my feeling is I want to make rank 1 be so easy that I can't find anyone who can't beat it. Because I assume that there are people with even lower, input capacity or whatever it takes to play this game well. I want rank 1 to be so easy that we can't find someone who can't beat it. On the other hand, I also want rank 20, the highest rank, to be so hard that we can't find anyone who can beat it. Because, like we want headroom and that kind of thing. But yeah, in the early days, I think there have been times when the game was way too easy. There have been times when the game has been way too hard. Right now, I think it's in a better place overall. I think rank 1, I'm pretty sure you would agree, rank 1 is like super easy. And if you play now we have 4 difficulty modes in the campaign. I don't know if those were around when you were there, but
I think there were only 3 when I was playing pretty close to release.
Yeah, so I over the last few months I've been just like discovering more and more what are the difficulty knobs for this game that make sense.
Right.
And so there was a few that like were just massive oversights, like, oh my god, I haven't been controlling for blank, and so we've cleaned up a bunch of those, and now I'm quite confident that rank 1 the easiest apprentice difficulty on the campaign is very easy, but I haven't actually played one myself through, so it's hard to say. But yeah, I'm with you. I think that like it's not, for me, it's like I'm not shooting for players to be able to stomp the game. Like I agree with you that there are players who are going to want to do that, and that's fine. But what I'm really shooting for is I'm imagining like someone with like just very, very, very low affinity for these kinds of games, and like trying our best to be accommodating to them. Because like we're all here on this Discord and on this community, we're all like, gamers and tactics gamers and whatever. So we all have like a decent base affinity for these kinds of games. But like there are people out there who've never played a game like this, and I want it to be accessible as possible for people like that. And so, effectively that will also support what you're requesting, which is a mode that you can kind of stomp.
Right. I don't know if I'd characterize it as wanting to stomp, but I don't. As an example, my first time through XCOM 2, which weirdly was the first XCOM I played, like my first rookie campaign, I
Mhm.
lost that one about 20 hours in. And then the
Hmm.
second one I beat. And so that sort of like um that sort of rate of growth I think is like my personal target in terms of like there should be setbacks. There
Yeah.
should be points when I fail, but like not more than once.
Yeah, oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I agree with you. I think if it was like that, it was just a matter of like it was off, like it was just not
Right.
where I wanted it to be. But yeah, I agree. Like, I mean, that's why I mean that's what ranked mode is supposed to be all about. Like, my vision for ranked mode is, like you get to a new rank, or let's say you start at rank, I don't know, 10 or something, and you like win one, you lose one, then you win two, then you lose one, then you win three or four, and now you rank up. You know what I mean? Like, and you have this
Right.
this. I don't want you to just like be permanently stuck at some rank. And I certainly don't want people to never be able to beat the campaign. I mean, although there is a vision of that with like a roguelike tradition of like how far can you get, like doing the whole like sort of score style, high score style approach, which is good in some kinds of games, but I think it has to be like acculturated to a given genre, and I feel like this is not one of the genres that people are used to that in, because tactics games are, and this maybe is a good segue into our next topic, which Ryan brought up, which is tactics games in our culture are RPGs. Like, that's what people know them as. Like, you know what I mean? Like XCOM is definitely an RPG. It has like
I
very deep RPG elements.
I
Um,
definitely would have classified XCOM more on the roguelike side.
well, but
Uh,
well, the thing that makes it really, to me, not a roguelike is it doesn't have like permadeath unless you're playing on like Iron Man mode or something, which is a bit of a weird mode. Like, the typical play of XCOM is this long progression where you're unlocking new things, and you know what I mean? Like, you're powering up your guys. It has the power growth over a persistent over time of an RPG.
I mean, I think that that power growth is characteristic of modern roguelikes. Certainly, stuff like FTL has a really similar kind of growth to it. Um,
Yeah,
so
I wouldn't call. I mean, like, we, of course, there's like all these debates about like what are roguelikes and whatever. Like, I think that's, people made up the term roguelites to refer to those because they are pretty different from like one of the main contributions of roguelikes to the video game world was the permadeath, the lack of persistence, the fact that they played like more like a Tetris or something. Like you sit down, you have one session, and it's in under an hour it's done, and then all your progress and everything is wiped. Like, that's what Rogue was like, and that's what Dungeon Crawl, NetHack, all those roguelikes were. And then the roguelite sort of genre, FTL and things like that, took some of the concepts from roguelikes but then applied it to a more, I guess, traditional video gamey slash RPG kind of long arc structure. um
I mean, FTL certainly I play in like one session per run.
Yeah,
Um,
FTL's kind of in between. You're right, actually. Yeah, it's
eh,
it's more roguelike than XCOM for sure.
right, XCOM I sort of see it as like taking that um fundamental roguelike uh sort of structure of like you have a run um and there's some goal that you're trying to reach, and you make some attempts where you don't reach that goal but get increasingly towards it, and then
Hmm.
eventually you do reach the goal, like sort of taking that structure and as Ryan says, stretching it out over 50 hours.
Right.
um then you're right that they added a bunch of, I don't, maybe we could say like consolification
Hmm.
in terms of making a lot of that permadeath optional.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Um, yeah. Um, yeah, so I mean, that's kind of been one of the struggles is that the only like all I'm saying is like all tactics games with the exception of like one that I can think of, they all have like persistence as part of their some amount of persistence as part of their design. That's probably a better word than saying RPG.
But when you say persistence, do you mean persistence between like tactical matches?
Yes. Yeah. And
In
the
terms of like your units are leveling up between them, or
yes, exactly. Anything like that, like you're gaining and losing units. The only example, the only counter example that comes to mind for me is Advance Wars, and I feel like that's just like Nintendo can pull anything off. Like they have the ability to do whatever, and people will go for it. But generally, I feel like that's pretty rare. I think to have a game that doesn't really focus on that persistent elements. So I think that's been a struggle for this game overall. Is that like it's not it's really about the match. Like the match is the thing, and I think that's something that's unusual. Um, you know what I'm saying? Like you can have a like you could I could definitely have shipped Gem Wizards just with ranked mode, and that's to me that's like the complete game. But so it wasn't like designed exactly for the campaign mode, and this is sort of maybe a different topic, but it plays a little bit into that somewhat.
right? And we may be getting too far into business demon territory.
Well, yeah,
here,
I was
but
gonna say
my
let's get into the business
sense
demon
is
stuff.
that like this sort of like ranked mode individual matches, like you could have shipped that as a tabletop war game,
Right, sorta, yeah. I mean, it'd be pretty fiddly
not
and
as a
annoying.
video game.
Mm-hmm.
Like the people who buy video games expect, and I can't speak for anyone else, but at least for me, want more, want meaning to carry over between matches.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. We've sort of talked about this a little bit on the Discord in terms of when I talk about arcs longer than one match.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there's different ways to accomplish that goal of like meaning carrying over between matches, and probably the simplest is having some sort of pre-authored narrative.
Mm-hmm.
The way Sierra talks about like sim plays are a structure that can contain games. You can make a sim play that has like series of matches that are connected by some narrative,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a way of building meaning beyond the match over a longer term, but you can get the same kind of thing with the roguelike structure where there's some prescribed goal that you're like spending some time building up the skills to reach that goal over multiple matches.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, for sure. No, yeah.
And right, so certainly for me that's sort of a thing that I'm looking for in video games.
Mm-hmm.
I think tabletop games sort of can get away with not having that because it comes built in with the fact that you need to play them with other people,
Mm-hmm.
and so like you have some relationship with those other people, and that sort of brings in this like the game is a part of that long narrative of that relationship. Certainly single player games, I find they need to build that in explicitly.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes, I agree for sure. And I've been thinking about that more. That like, I mean, like that all games are like social and all games are narrative. And you're right that like in the board game world, it's like you have the social circle of people who play the game, um, and so that kind of provides that to some extent. And single player games kind of need that more. With that said, like I do maybe object to the idea that like, oh, there's just one way to contextualize you know, strategy games, and that is like permanent growth and persistence and those kind of like RPG-ish sort of values. Like I think we can you know, I think if with sufficient support, and maybe it's not accessible to a developer like myself, but I think that like it would be possible for a developer to make a single player like sort of ranked mode kind of game and build enough like mechanisms for making that more social. Like that's something like like with Oro, you know, I also never really dove into that as much as I should have. And like, you know, there's things like leaderboards, there's things like sharing GIFs and screenshots, and, you know, I guess achievements might be some kind of like loosely some kind of system like that. There's also things that like no one has thought of yet, you know, like, but I'm very interested in those kinds of questions because to me, the arcs longer than one match, in my conception of the strategy game, are kind of like they have problems, you know, like they're troublesome, I think, for these kind of games. So I'm, you know, I'm sort of torn between like, well, do I try to maybe make a single player strategy game that does all the things, like it has a campaign mode and it also has the RPG-ish kind of elements, or do I try to like come up with some weird innovative thing that makes that one player strategy game thing social, or do I just make multiplayer games? You know, like that's the other possibility.
Right. And then that
Actually,
that gets into a whole mess of not just like game design and artistic constraints, but then there's like all the business demon constraints that you need to consider in choosing those. And I definitely don't have an answer about like which way is the way to go.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. But I'm very interested in finding ways to make this game more social. Another thing that's kind of interesting is that like tactics games, because I was thinking for a little bit. Right now, Brett is working. Oh, here's a way to make the game a lot more social. Actually, Brett right now is working on a map editor for this game, and I think that that is one possible way to make a game more social, is to be able to like share maps and like be like, oh, you know, can you beat this weird challenge map that I made, and those kinds of things. Like Super Mario Maker is probably a pretty good example of that. Include actually Advance Wars had a pretty good map editor too. So that's something that is being worked on now. But before we decided to do that, we were also thinking like, oh, maybe we'll do multiplayer next. But then I was thinking, I was like, does anyone play games like this multiplayer? Like, that's not really a thing. You know what I mean? Like, and that sort of plays more into what I was saying before about like, these games kind of are RPGs. Like they're
right. I've never found someone to play XCOM multiplayer with.
Right.
I've always wanted to try it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to like set it up, and I think especially with Wizards Tactics, because of the size of the search tree for each turn, it's, I suppose, an asynchronous multiplayer model where you know, you like take your turn and then the other person gets a notification and has like 24 hours to take their turn.
Sure.
That might work, but like the idea of sitting waiting for the other person to do their turn is like, I'm pulling out my phone.
Yeah, for sure. It's really just not made for that kind of. So that there is practical reasons for that as well. But it's interesting because like I you know, yeah, I guess that's probably it at the end of the day. It just takes too long, too much waiting. Period. You know. But yeah. So did you have more business demon thoughts?
I I didn't do as much preparation of figuring out how to talk about those coherently. So like maybe we could talk about them briefly today, but we might want to get into more detail at some later point.
Sure.
But essentially, there's like so your project really seems to be like working on and maintaining and improving games over many years.
Yeah.
Like in the past year, you've been shipping updates for Aro, which is almost a decade old now, right?
Well, since it started development, yeah, but about 6 or 7 years since it launched originally.
Yeah, and that's really remarkable for a game that's not getting a lot of recurring revenue.
Sure.
So if you look at something like Rocket League, that's now a live game.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Psyonix's previous releases, it made in 2008 they released Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket Powered Battle Cars.
Okay.
Which is a really similar game.
Interesting.
That they released for the PlayStation 3. And then they made some other stuff. And then they made Rocket League.
Mm-hmm.
That one was successful enough to become this living live game.
Sure.
In terms of like that software SKU.
Mm-hmm.
Continuing to be maintained.
Yeah.
But if you sort of zoom out a little, it becomes clear that like they're working on one game across multiple releases. What Gabriel Del Santo calls the regularly shipped engine. And so I think like if that is maybe the place I would recommend that you steer.
Mm-hmm.
Is sort of starting to think about like the rule set that you're working on over many years as separate from the software product that you're selling, and how can you when is the point to stop updating a given piece of software and then maybe make more major changes to the rule set than would be tolerable within that same piece of software, and then release a new release on Steam or wherever that has those major changes. That's sort of like the evolution of that game, the rule set, in released as its own video game, and how can you, over multiple releases, do that long-term development and evolution work in hopefully a more financially sustainable way?
Yeah, so like a couple ways in which, I mean, first of all, you could say that this game is an extension of Oro. Because, you know, it's really just like the bumping tactics thing, you know, like it's like so much of what I implemented in this game was stuff that I learned on Oro. And actually, you could kind of say sort of the same with Dragon Bridge. Like I'm hovering around this concept of like the bumping tactical game that has all the, you know, the emergent complexity, double-edged sword, second order effects, and all these things. And yeah, so but I think maybe what you would advocate, or what the business demon would advocate, is instead of making all these updates and making the product better and better and better, just like abandon it sooner and make like a sequel, or make like another game, you know, that, I mean, the issue with indies making another game starting from scratch is that it's so expensive to build all the assets and all the stuff.
Right.
So that's why, like, I guess sequels are a better approach. But I'm also like, I don't know, I have bad feelings about sequels too. Like, and maybe this is a silly aspect of my personality, but like, to me, I just feel like there's just so much chaff out there. There's just so much like crap, and like you don't know what the fuck, what even are people saying I should play? Like, what even is the real good thing? Like that, like what's the thing that the developer really cares about? And so there's a part of me that's like, you know, I want I really need to capture this flag. But like I want there to be like Gem Wizards Tactics. Boom. That's it. And it's just gonna be like I'm just gonna keep working on it and make it this amazing thing. And like uh it's a very not business demon strategy for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like a strategy that I don't know if it's viable under capitalism and the current state of the video game market.
Right.
So my guess is that your sort of anti-sequel sentiment is probably to some extent derived from the way that when there's a successful IP, the business demons swoop in and they're like extrude more of that.
Yes. 100%.
And oh, hey Semi Myth, I'm glad my promoting this stream brought some new people in. And so the business model of Stardew, yeah, was like just work on it for a long time and then win the lottery, and now he can buy a new desk instead of the super broken one that he had.
Right.
Which like I don't know about anyone else. I am not prepared to have win the lottery be part of my plan.
For sure.
So it's sort of like, okay, what other options do we have? And so I think there's what I would probably recommend for Gem Wizards Tactics specifically is so there's one more big update that I know you're planning that's not announced yet.
Well, I did talk about the map editor. That's the big one,
right? But it's we haven't done the big announcement.
True.
And that's like, this is one of the things that like we've been talking about on Discord that I've I don't know if been trying to teach you is the right way to say it, but just the like how do you space out and time when like when you're talking about things.
Sure. Give people some room to be excited about something, right? Like that's one way to put it.
But also it's like you need to give them the room to be excited about it. You need to stack up enough what Thomas Reisenegger calls PR ammo. Actually get people excited about it. It like dropping enough at one point in time, and then there's like you want to optimize how much time do people have to get hyped, so it's like a good amount and not too long and not too short.
Sure.
So like we're gonna do a big announcement of that update soonish, not sure when yet, and then like that update's gonna come out, and my recommendation would probably be to have that be the last content update. Gem Wizards Tactics. And like obviously bug fixes, important. Maybe balance patches. In terms of like really significant new content and new game design work to move that to some new not this software.
Right.
Whether that's a Gem Wizards Tactics 2, whether it's some other kind of game, something else, like maybe you go and you make like, I don't know, a real-time fighting game or something, and then you come back to the like hex bumping thing.
Yeah.
To like to basically to say like, okay, I've made a product. It's worth $15, I think, is the price point. And be like, here it is. You can buy it. now there's still this game design space I want to explore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna do that. That's gonna generate a new product that you can buy. And I guess sort of to have the chutzpah to say, like, under capitalism, my art is worth your money.
Mm-hmm.
And like, this amount of my art is worth your $15, and then the next amount of my art is worth your next 15 or 20 or whatever.
Sure.
Rather than the, like, I mean, I would love to be able to make a game, release it for free, keep working on it for a decade.
Sure.
That's just, like, not feasible in the world that I live in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think what you're saying makes sense. The one thing is that, like I said, it's like very, very costly, not just to produce a game, but also to produce all of the, like, the marketing stuff and all of the, just, it's so much. And like, so that I think is part of why sequels are popular. A popular design method, and like maybe that's something I need to just get over. But yeah, I you know, I definitely take what you're saying to heart.
Sequels have a really strong network effect. Just as a personal example, after I bought XCOM 2 when it was on sale, I played it, I liked it a lot, and then I went and I bought Enemy Unknown, and I played a bunch of that too.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never played a Civilization in my life. So there's something about that shared IP
Mm-hmm.
and the shared mechanics that got me to play the other one.
Yeah.
Like the shared creator identity didn't.
Right. Okay. See what you're saying? Yeah.
And Semi-Myth raises like, one of the reasons that sequels are sort of make sense is the way the Steam algorithms work, where each new Steam product you release gives you new opportunities to show up in the upcoming games and then in the new release games charts and everything. Basically, it gives you extra lottery tickets. Now there's sort of a counter force where what Steam cares about in terms of what it uses to decide how many people to show a game to is that game's revenue. Where like, if you're splitting something up into a bunch of different software products with that, and like you're splitting that revenue across all of them, then you're gonna get less visibility than if you had been able to put them all together and charge that combined amount for the whole thing as one product.
Right.
And so they're like, the balance of what the call there is that makes the most sense is gonna really depend on specific circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so Hair Machine mentions that the Hitman games are a good example of releasing basically the same game with basically just new content.
Mm-hmm.
And like, my sense is really that you want to evolve the game to a point where it like, in terms of rules, it wouldn't be recognizable as, or I mean, it would be recognizable as like a descendant or part of the same family, but it wouldn't be fair to call it the same game in terms of the rule set.
Mm-hmm.
Is that sort of an accurate assessment of your goals?
I mean, like my goals are really primarily, you know, come up with an idea for a game that pursues my vision of like the strategy game, particularly the one-player strategy game, which is of interest to me, and then build the thing, and then develop it and like really hone it and add to it and make it, like, you know, sort of the full vision of what that thing is, which honestly, like, I think Gem Wizards right now is like pretty darn close to that. Like, there's definitely, like, we've been talking about like possible, it can be improved like for a decade or more. But I think like right now I'm pretty proud of what it is, and it is pretty close to like what I had in mind. And so like in terms of like uh making a new thing, like it would have to be significantly different, I feel like, because like I really love the idea also of like adding more modes to this game, so like for example this map editor thing, like that could be like a whole nother piece of software. Like that could be like Gem Wizards Tactics 2 and it's just all about puzzles, or like Gem Wizards Tactics Puzzle or something, and it's just like a puzzle game that has a ton of puzzles and people can make their own maps and puzzles and stuff. That's probably a smart business demon move, I think. So I don't know. What do you think about that? Is that kind of along the lines of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean that's a thing you could do. I think in this case though, it probably makes sense to have it be a update for Gem Wizards Tactics, just in terms of like, I don't even have a strong justification for that, but it feels like it belongs in the same product.
Okay.
Whereas I don't know, like we were chatting on Discord about a change you were thinking about where with a fixed initiative order where like
Yes.
you can assess and take actions with one unit at a time and then the next one, and that sort of change is some, and maybe we have a threshold difference here, but that seems to me that like with a game that's already released, making that sort of change to it, in early access maybe you can swing it, but like without that, and like we've worked on the messaging about like how Gem Wizards Tactics is still evolving, but I don't think that messaging is at a place where that a change that major makes sense to do in this product, and so that's the sort of change where like the way XCOM did with Chimera Squad, I think the causal relationship was reversed, where they wanted to make this new game, and then that's a change that they made for it for pretty much unrelated reasons. But they're like, it is the case that didn't change XCOM 2. They made a new XCOM with a fixed initiative order, and I don't know if that's a thing you're ever planning on exploring for real, but like if it were, my recommendation would be that be a new game,
Right.
a new store listing, rather than an update to this one.
And a few more changes too, like not just that, but like a re-envisioning, and that's a good like way to look at like a sequel. Right? Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly Chimera Squad, I felt like they changed I don't know if it's the core mechanism, but like they changed this mechanism really close to the core, and then they didn't do enough of the necessary resulting changes to the supporting mechanisms around how turns work, for like it felt a little half-baked, and so you're absolutely right that a change that big requires a lot of changes to the supporting mechanisms. And yeah, then when you get to that point, I think it makes more sense to call that a new video game. And
as long as you couple it with enough other changes. Like obviously if I just launched this software again with that one change, that would be ridiculous.
I mean, you could do it on mobile for sure. Steam, I'm not so sure about. But like, yeah, the set of changes about, well, so there's like this thing that people expect from a sequel, which is like some new narrative. And I mean, there's a whole thing there where like thing that some reviewers expected from Gem Wizard's Tactics was a narrative, and then were disappointed when they didn't get that. And so, like, you don't see board game sequels, right?
Rarely. Sometimes you do.
But-
There's a Small World 2 was very popular on iOS, and
Interesting.
it's literally just Small World again. It's another app of Small World. They didn't really change the rules or anything. They just made a better app and called it Small World 2. It's very strange.
Oh well, so that's like a different software for the same rule set, I guess. But like, I don't really play a whole lot of tabletop games because I don't like doing computation with my meat computer. I want a metal computer to do that for me. But like, can't think of single game that had a sequel. The way video games have like, there's a billion Assassin's Creeds and a bunch of them have numbers.
I can tell you the way they do it, like Uwe Rosenberg, who's one of the best tabletop game designers, he made like Agricola, Le Havre, and all these other games. Some of them are behind me here, but and then Caverna is basically like the sequel to Agricola. Like it's basically Agricola second edition, But
and so he's like working with a lot of the same stuff that he was working with in Agricola, and sort of like evolving and iterating that design, but it has like a new sort of a new IP. Semi-Myth is mentioning Forbidden Island and Forbidden Desert, which is a really good example of like a forbidden anthology. Where was I going with this?
I mean, I think we're all... Yeah, go on.
So, like, your project seems to be... Yeah, I might describe it on certain days as making digital games that are like tabletop games.
Yes.
In terms of a lot of their characteristics with like the match structure and like the replayability and your goal of like being able to live in them. And so I wonder if there's if the right strategy looks more like a board game strategy, where it's not Gem Wizards 2, if it's...
They do expansions also, by the way, in board games. That's pretty big.
And so the issue there with sort of trying to port a board game strategy to video games is like how to get, like, that's a new thing that people will be afraid of, and like how to talk to them about it.
Sure.
And them to not be afraid of it. But it might be worth thinking about if like that's a way to go.
Well, what can you be more specific? Like, what is this way that you're talking about?
Or
you're not sure. You're just saying
sure,
it's a general.
Because it's almost making a new business model.
Yeah, I love the idea of that.
Where like there's a well-established business model in video games of like release a game, and if it does some amount of well, you then release that game too. Like some system changes and new content. And so there's a path that's easy for me to imagine where like wrap work on Gem Wizard's Tactics, then you sit down and like make a list of the things you want to do with like that rule set, or like new edges of it you want to explore or whatever. And you also make you go through all the reviews of Gem Wizard's Tactics, and you make a list of like what did people want that what were people expecting or wanting from Gem Wizards Tactics that they didn't get, that was disappointing for them. And then you basically like look at those lists and figure out some of those things you're going to say like I'm not going to do that in Gem Wizards 2.
Sure.
And some of them you're going to say I will do that in Gem Wizards 2. And then you have like list of what Gem Wizards 2 is going to look like, and then you make that. And sort of the standard version of that is like with Hitman, very little rules changes, new content, or like Assassin's Creed has minor rule changes, new content mostly. And maybe your version would be more like major rules changes, not a focus on content. But there's still there's like it's easy to imagine how to do that. It's harder for me to imagine, maybe just because I'm less experienced in the board game space or less knowledgeable about it, but it's harder to figure out like what would it look like for you to follow that kind of strategy of like working on this rule set and then releasing a new product that's not the same IP that like maybe would be another game in the Gem Wizards universe, but like what would it be called?
That's one thing What do you mean? Wait, well, there could be all kinds of things, but I mean, like Dragon Bridge is another game in the Gem Wizards universe. But the idea is, I already have so much development in this universe, which I wish I had started that sooner. That's something that unlike sequels, it's similar to sequels, is like having a universe that you're working in. It's similar to that, but it's like, to me, it feels less bad. Like it doesn't bother me, and it's so helpful having all these like, all this lore and stuff to draw from already, rather than starting from scratch completely with every single game that you do. So I'll definitely continue, no matter what I do. Like the next thing I work on, whether it's more updates to this game or whether it's another game, it's going to be a Gem Wizards thing, like for sure.
Right. And so Dragon Bridge is an interesting example because it like there's nothing in the name, and I don't think there's anything on the box that says like this is a Gem Wizards game.
There's a little thing at the top. It's very small, but it's just a little brand, which I actually don't even use in this game. But there's a little Gem Wizards thing on there. But yeah, You're right. Because it was the first Gem Wizards game, so I wasn't like fully conscious of the idea yet, that I was going to do this. So it's kind of like how in the first Star Trek TOS, there was no Starfleet yet. It's a little bit like that.
Yeah, so I think like if you're not doing Wizards Tactics 2, or like it probably makes sense to stick a subtitle on whatever comes next. Like Derby's Revenge, a Gem Wizards game or whatever.
Sure, yeah.
I don't know who Derby would be taking revenge on.
The business demons. You obviously did not play the single player story mode.
I did play the single player, but like okay, maybe spoilers for Derby's story coming up here. I don't know. My sense was like the lesson of Derby's story was
just be a nice capitalist.
It was anti-capital. It wasn't a like grab your guillotine and eat the rich. It was like, yo, get off our how get out of our home and like go be capitalist on your continent. And so it seems to me that the lesson that Derby would draw there, and I don't know, maybe I'm bringing too much of my own subtext, but I feel like the logical place for Derby to go is like, okay, you have a resistance, you drive the business demons off of, I forget the name of the continent where it's set, and then you're like, okay, they're gone. It's chill. There's a line in so in XCOM 2, there's like these voice lines where while you're in the base, people just like say random stuff, and one of
Mhm.
them is Central Officer Bradford. He's just like, maybe when this war is over, we'll take the Avenger and go colonize one of their planets. I'm
So-
like, whoa, Bradford, no. I'm, did you forget what we're fighting for here?
right, sure. Yeah. No, I mean, for me, I was just trying to write about exploitation and capitalism being just one kind of exploitation, and so I was trying to be more broad. But I also wrote that entire thing in like a day or something. Like it was very very fast. So I'm sure it has issues for sure. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, the next thing certainly could be. I mean, it does seem to me that like narrative is a majorly important component for single player games for people to understand single player games and to care about them. Uh,
Right.
and that's something
I,
that's been a point of difficulty for me because I'm not a big narrative person. Like words are inherently uninteractive. They can't have second order effects. They can't have combinatorial properties. They're purely what the author wrote, and that's it. No more, no less. And so it's not my thing that I love to do. And so that definitely has been a problem for me as someone who makes. I should probably have been making multiplayer games. Like, that's the practical place to go. I think for based on who I am and stuff.
um, you sort of gave me two thoughts, and I'm not sure which one to tackle first. Um, maybe the so I and when you were talking about like how people are expect like a single player narrative, um, I don't. It sort of coalesced a thought about because I'd been thinking earlier about how like one of the things that really explodes the size of the search tree is that a bunch of units have multiple abilities
Mm-hmm.
can use. And so it's like you have all these units, and then each unit has a bunch of different things they could do.
Yeah.
And then there's all the stuff about like they could use an ability and then move, or move and then use it,
Yeah.
and whereas like keep going back to XCOM because that's the example that I have across the 3 games, 7.5 weeks of playtime in.
Sure.
They at the start of the game, all your units can do the default action.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a term that I took from Justin Alexander's Game Structures
Okay.
essay, which is where he looks at the game structures that existed at the time in tabletop role-playing games, the dungeon crawl, the hex crawl, and the mystery, and sort of like broke them down and tried to figure out how do we build new game structures.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things he identified that game structures have is a default goal and a default action. So with the dungeon crawl, for example, you have the default goal of clearing the dungeon, getting all its treasure, killing all the monsters, and the default action is explore the next room.
Okay.
And I haven't figured out how the default goal concept maps to this yet, but certainly there's the default action of like in XCOM, it's move to a better position and then shoot an enemy.
Yep.
And whereas at least when I played with Gem Wizard's Tactics, the default action of like move and melee attack an enemy, hopefully with a flank, wasn't very effective.
Right.
In XCOM, when you're starting out, the enemies you're facing, that default action of move and shoot is effective enough.
Right.
And so they can start you out where that's all you can do. And then
Yeah.
slowly over the course of the game, they're introducing more abilities to each unit. And until at the end of the at the end of the progression that's built in, you might have 8 to 10 abilities on a bunch of units, and then of course there's mods that give you even more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if sort of Gem Wizards, it has we've talked about how I feel like its hook is that you can set up these crazy combos, and so having lots of abilities is important to that.
Sure.
But I wonder if there's a way to. I don't think it belongs in software, but in some successor sequel or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think there might be a place to have sort of some sort of introductory narrative campaign where you start out with units without abilities.
Mm-hmm.
You slowly build up their slate of abilities over the course of that campaign,
Mm-hmm.
and then like at the end of the campaign, they're maybe at the point where they would be in like the ranked play
Mm-hmm.
in terms of having all of their abilities.
Right.
Just like something to introduce it slowly over time.
Yeah, I mean, Derby's story kind of has that, but you do have abilities from the get go. So I could make it
Right.
that I could change that though. I could make it that like the first few missions, like you just don't have those abilities. Um, that would maybe
Derby's
be
story
helpful.
is like sort of does that in terms of introducing units over
Hmm.
time. Um, but I get so this is one of the changes that's sort of above my threshold of a tolerable change in this product
Uh huh.
in terms of like I don't think it makes sense to change here.
Right.
But I think it makes sense to think about going forward when and as you move on to the next commercial iteration of this like hex bumping tactics project
Hmm.
to think about like what what is maybe a better balance of like having enough abilities to be able to do cool combos,
Yeah.
having few enough having like that enough while having as few as possible to keep the size of the search tree small. Um,
Well,
and
aren't you
then
aren't you also just talking
how do you
about
introduce them over time?
Yeah, that's the biggest one, isn't it? Because like actually at the high levels of play, I think GWT kind of works. Like it's fine for like a player like Redshiv who plays a lot and is like a very high level player. It's pretty good. It's more just like at the lower levels when you're being introduced. So it's more of like an onboarding thing, or do you not agree?
Well, I guess what I would say is the Reshivs of the world are few and far between.
Yeah.
Most players of video games are never going to get to that point. Like if we design a sort of progression curve where
Hmm.
you start out with like one unit with 0 abilities, and then you build up to all the units and each of them has 3 abilities.
Hmm.
Like Reshiv can handle that and have fun, and that's great, but most people aren't going to get there.
Hmm.
And so it comes down to a question of like, are we designing for those very few people,
Yeah.
or are we designing something with broader commercial appeal?
Right.
And there's a question in there of like, how holographic can make it? Can we support that really high level of play and something simpler, I guess, in the same game? I don't know. Can we have like a full ranked mode and a simple ranked mode where people have fewer abilities? That's like they look like halfway along that progression curve.
Hmm.
I don't. That feels icky to me, but I think there's like some solution there probably in terms of supporting that high level of play and supporting a wider range below that level. But there's also I don't know. I think it varies per game, and I don't know with like this rule set how wide a range is possible there.
Hmm.
And so I think it is conceivable that there might be a point where you have to decide um, you have to sort of choose between like bringing down lowering that range so that the lower end is at a more appealing place or
Yeah.
like keeping it high so the high end is all the way up there.
I can't you have both though? I mean, or you're saying if the high end is too high, that'll be a problem for everybody. Well, almost everybody.
Well, I'm saying like there's like a limit to how wide you can make the range.
Yeah.
Between like what the most advanced and least advanced level of complexity there.
Right.
And so then you have like this, like, I don't, if we say like the range is 1.
Right. No, I get what you're saying.
Then you can like move it on the slider from like the but like you can only cover that range. So if there's a certain point on the slider you want to hit, like you have to move the range there. You can't.
Yeah.
Like there's things you can do to tweak the size, but not necessarily as much as you might like.
Right. So I need to wrap up in about 5-10 minutes. So I want to quickly just go through chat and then like kind of like summarize, take a few takes from our discussion.
Awesome.
Yeah. No More Birds says Dragon Bridge 2nd edition will definitely have more Gem Wizards integration. Yeah, that'd be cool. Oro sort of does this right. Starts very simple. Air Machine says. Yeah, I think so. I mean, does it? I don't know, actually. I mean, in terms of the monsters, the types of monsters you can face, it does. I think this game kind of does that too, though. Like, there's only 2 or 3 monster types you see in the early ranks. In this game, if you start an apprentice campaign or you do a very low rank game, I'm pretty sure, and I'll double check on this after the show. Let me write this down, actually. Make sure that early rank easy games have like 1 to 2 types of monsters. That's a big one. Also, somebody came up with this idea the other day of easy campaigns start with more of the same type of unit. In fact, what's that?
That's a really good idea, I think.
Yeah.
If the player starting units have more similarity, I also think there might be some level tying the number of types of enemies you're facing to rank makes sense, but I wonder if it might also make sense to decouple it from rank, and have that be a separate slider that, like, if you have a rank 1 campaign that you're playing, increase the number of enemy types you're facing over the course of the campaign without increasing like the rank difficulty of the matches, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'll think about that. I mean, that might be a bit on the granular side for like asking the player to know. Like, it's almost a game designy question. Like, you know, players wouldn't necessarily know how many monsters do I want to be facing. Like, I don't know. You know, it's kind of it's a weird question to prompt players with. I think in terms of like a custom game setting, I think that's better. But for just campaign difficulty options, it feels like a lot. Maybe.
I'm not necessarily proposing it as a player-facing option. I mean, if you're certainly when I was playing it, it was just like you could pick from 3 difficulties, and I don't know if since then you've like broken out the different difficulty tuning variables to like customize difficulty. In which case, I guess it would be in there, but I'm thinking of it as more as like design some curve there for each difficulty.
Right.
The way like XCOM does that, where you start out facing just troopers, and then they like just troopers and officers and sectoids.
Mm-hmm.
And then over the course of the game, like because there's a certain amount of numbers go up in there, they are like introducing elite troopers or whatever, but they're also introducing units like the Archon and the Andromedon that have higher numbers but also have different abilities.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing that introduction over time over the course of the campaign.
Sure.
So you're the same way that they do with the the verbs the player has. They're introducing new verbs for the enemy,
Yeah,
spaced out over time.
sure. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the tutorialization of this game really could be a lot more improved, I think, in terms of like every new enemy that you see for the first time, there could be like an event that tells you about that sort of that enemy. In fact, that wouldn't be too hard to implement. Is like a enemy introduction, just literally one little conversation. Because for the first time you see a certain enemy, because it's a lot. Like when you first step into Gem Wizards, it's just like, oh my god, like, so wait, I have 6 unit types that all have their own abilities, and there's all these enemies that have like different things. But I do think that one of the things I would say in this conversation in Gem Wizards' defense is I think it has come a bit of a way since you last played, so I definitely look forward to hearing what you think about the latest version. So let's wrap this up and just a couple of takes and things to do. We were talking about making the game a little more smooth, a little bit less calculation-y and chunky. I just played a match while we were talking, rank 10 match, and it took 26 minutes, which is like, it's a little on the high end, and I think that this is one of those things that would smooth that out, is like adding cooldowns. I forget if there was another thing that you had or that we discussed, but there's that. And then the other big take in terms of like business demon take is just like make a new game, move on to the next game, right?
Right. And so as far as the like game design search tree stuff, we also talked about like constraining the order of what you can do, so making it like you move and then you do an ability and the ability ends your turn. One of the things we didn't talk about was unit count, and how like Into the Breach have 3 units. XCOM you go from 4 to 6 over the course of the campaign, and like that's one of the most powerful variables you can tune for search tree size,
For sure.
and maybe worth I don't know where you've tuned that in the current difficulty setting, so
Right
I don't
now,
make any
you
prescriptions
you
before I check that out.
Yeah, I mean the default that you start with now usually is 5. I have tried almost every number from like I don't think I've tried 4, because it does seem to me that maybe 4 is too few for this game, just because of the interconnectedness and the longer arcs of the basic gameplay. It seems like you need to be able to lose units, and also to to just have like more interconnection than maybe 4 would allow. But I don't know, this is one of those things where like so actually real quick, I know I gotta go, but the Crouch mode brought up, aka Marcus brought up, expansions, which we didn't really talk about. I would like to get your take on doing what do you think of the idea of a Gem Wizards Tactics expansion that had like, I don't know, 3 more factions in it, or some other new big game mode or something like that? Do you think that's a good move?
I think that's a potentially viable move. I think like any given thing that might be an expansion could also be a sequel.
Yeah.
And so like we would want to look at the specifics of that to figure out what the right way to go is.
Yeah.
And that's probably something we wouldn't want to do on a public live show, just
Sure.
because like we want to have like the announcement and the hype.
Of course, yeah. And then I forget if there was any other big things that we wanted to talk about, but I think that was just about it. Yeah, so I do feel like I'm gonna like sort of wrap up Gem Wizards, at least for the short term. For one reason, I want to see if I can like try to get people involved to like like dive in on the game. And it is really hard to dive in on the game when you have that sense that like it's just a moving target and anything you learn is just gonna be thrown to the wind in a week. So I want to like kind of lock it in a little bit, and like let there be time for things to develop and sort of do some social things with it if I can. I have an idea for like a tournament that I think would be really cool and fun. And yeah, polish and fix bugs. I mean, I've been on polish and bug fixing for the last like month or two, so it still has some bugs, but it's definitely come a long way since that last big update a month or so ago. Um, and yeah, I think that's about it. I gotta wrap up now, but GLP, aka Herbivore, thank you so much for joining me, and
Thank you
this
so
has
much
been
for
really
having me on.
it's been really helpful and cool and interesting, and I guess I will see you all in the Discord.
There.
Alrighty, see yous.